Bruchim Habayim, and welcome to this week's Taste of Torah. So we begin by saying Chag Sameach because Zot HaTorah, it's very, very small. It's not even an actual Torah because it's made out of paper, but this is a Torah, right? So we're coming up on the holiday of Shavuot, which by Jewish tradition is the holiday at which we are standing at Mount Sinai and we receive the Torah. Sometimes people sort of use the metonym of receiving the Ten Commandments. This is not the actual Ten Commandments. First of all, it's got all these weird Roman numerals on it. More importantly, uh, why the tombstone thing? Nobody can explain that to me. This shape was probably not the shape that the actual Aseret Dibrot, the 10 utterances, were inscribed upon. It was probably just a square tablet, the way we think of it when we think of like Ugaritic texts or clay texts and things like that. But in any case, this was given to me, however, by the minister at the Baptist church. So I always have it around and it's useful to hold up. Someday I'll get myself a proper square set. Anyway, Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, 49 days to the 50th day after the second day of Passover. In agricultural, ordinary terms, this is the time when the barley harvest is done and the wheat harvest begins. So we're overlapping in the harvest process of the summer. But on a cosmic level, this is where we stand at Mount Sinai. Sadly, because it sort of falls at the end of the academic year, we're all starting our vacations and things like this. The celebration of this most important Jewish holiday has weakened over time. It's not as much in our consciousness as it probably should be. So let me tell you what's happening this weekend. Because it is about the Torah, we associate this event with study. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be celebrating on the eve, the night of the beginning of the holiday. That would be this Sunday, the 16th, with a symposium of Torah study. In the mystical tradition, it's called the Tikkun Leil Shavuot, a night of repairing the holiday of Shavuot. You notice there's always fragments in here. And of course, famously, Moses broke the 10 Commandments. More importantly, according to the mystical tradition, we sort of flubbed our first appearance to hear the commandments. We slept in, not the worst sin, but as employers go, no employer likes you to sleep in, and God didn't like it either. So as a means of tikkun, we start the very beginning of the holiday with study, and in our case, we study from 8 o'clock until midnight. We'd love to have you. It will be in the sanctuary, socially distanced, and we want you to come and join our symposium of a number of different presentations in different modalities, so it shouldn't get boring. But we'll also put it on Zoom. So if you're interested, you can sign into Zoom and watch it remotely. Either way, come celebrate the holiday of Shavuot. All right, now we come to our Torah portion. Our Torah portion is significant because it's the first Torah portion in the book of Numbers. We moved on to a new book, the fourth book of the five books of Moses. The book itself is called B'midbar, and so is the Torah portion, because in both cases we use the first significant word. B'midbar means while in the wilderness or during being in the wilderness. And then it goes on to tell us, what is it about while we were in the wilderness? And the answer is God commands a census, a head count. Now, that sounds like a fairly boring topic, and on the surface, it isn't terribly compelling. But of course, we live in an age of big numbers, right? This year in America, we just finished a census for the purposes of distributing districts and redistricting. Texas is going to come out ahead with some new seats in the legislature. Other states are going to be losers, comparatively speaking. But this makes a big difference. These numbers, these big numbers are very important. Not only that, because we do live in the digital age, the age of information, the age of big numbers, we can know so much more than we ever knew before. And it's incredibly important. On a negative side, I would call attention to the fact that we have been able to realistically track COVID deaths. Now, that's not a terribly comforting idea, but at a time when we may know an individual who got sick, or we may know an individual who died, we really didn't understand the scope or pervasiveness. We can't, because our vision is so limited. But when we are able to gather statistics and we discover that, lo and behold, it's now 650,000 people in this country, and we have vastly more happening around the world, we have a much greater sense of what is going wrong, and to some extent, how we can fix it. And so that information is absolutely invaluable for the well-being of humanity. And as it turns out, the census for ancient Israel, while they were in the wilderness, also proves to be significant. So let's talk about it. The meaning of the census has changed over time in Jewish interpretation. And so I'm just going to hit on a couple of highlights, not a lot. I just want to explain a little bit. So first of all, this census on its surface is a military census, a census of the military age men among the Israelites. So they're going from tribe to tribe, and they're counting all the men from the age of 20 to 40 who are able to fight and bear arms. Let's talk about military presence for a moment. If you look at the modern world, this is often expressed in terms of a military parade. Some nations love military parades, some nations not so much. In America, we're not much into military parades, and there's a specific reason why. Because, in fact, we know we are the most powerful, or one of the most powerful countries in the world. Military parades are morale boosting activities, and so we don't need that. It's interesting to look at the state of Israel, which we're all familiar with. From 1949 until about 3 years after the Six-Day War, Israel held a grand military parade every year, and then they stopped. Why? Well, military parades are, as I said, morale boosters, and they're the particular domain of countries that feel weak and vulnerable. So one holds a military parade for the purpose of, one, building up the morale of your own people. See, look at, we have great power. It's all visible right here as the soldiers and the trucks and the tanks and the missiles and the airplanes go by. It also serves the message. It's a deterrent message to enemies. We want our enemies to see that we're not pushovers. And so Israel, from the first time it came into existence, where it had to fight other surrounding states to exist, until the Six-Day War, had a military parade, both to communicate domestically, but also to communicate to its neighbors. After the Six-Day War, Israel realized it didn't have much to prove. And as a result, the military parade disappeared from the annual schedule of public events. So really the same thing applies here in the story of counting the Israelites. right? The purpose of this census is to boost morale. It's to make the Israelites feel more confident about their ability to survive. After all, what are they? At this point, they're refugees. They're refugee slaves. They felt incredibly vulnerable in the face of Pharaoh's army. So now that they're in the wilderness and they're going to have to rely on their own ability to fight, and they have fought in the past, taking the census is a reassuring activity. Now, there's a lot to be debated about this census from this perspective, because we have a problem with the word Eleph. Eleph is the word used to bundle up and group each one of these tribal counts, head counts. Now, Eleph has pretty much from the beginning meant the numeric number 1,000. All right. So, and that's certainly what it means in modern Hebrew. Now, just as an interesting derivation, the term for a general in the IDF is an aluf. Same root, different vowels. Aluf means the commander of thousands, right? Anybody who commands a brigade or larger in the IDF, it gets the title of aluf. So clearly 1,000 is the idea that is meant. However, there is a good argument to be made by biblical scholars that in its original context, Eleph simply means a group, perhaps a band or a cohort. In other words, it's not a fixed number. It's a term for a collective without being specific. And the reason this seems reasonable is because if you take the numbers literally as 1,000, every time it says that the tribe of Reuben has 32 Elephim, 32,000 men, and then you add up all the 12 tribes, you end up with 600,000 military age men. That doesn't make a great deal of sense for the ancient world. That's a lot of people. Why would 900 chariots be a threat from Pharaoh if you had 600,000 men who could fight? And this is a characteristic of the ancient world that numbers get inflated. You can see that in the accounts of ancient warfare. Oh, the Darcians have 250,000 men or something like that. Probably cut that by a measurement of 10. And you'll get a reasonable sense of what we're talking about. And if in fact you turn it from 32,000 Elephim from 32,000 to 32 cohorts, 10 men, 12 men, a squad, then the numbers become much more practical. And so it is very popular in these days to translate it as 32 contingents, 64 contingents, rather than 32,000, 64,000. All right, so that's the realistic discussion. And in its context, again, it is to reinforce the Israelite sense of confidence. But you can extrapolate from that. As soon as you know how many military age men there are, you also know how many other Israelites there are. You can pretty much statistically figure out the number of women, children, elderly by the number of military age people. And so that gives us either the number of 600,000 turning into 2 million, very impractical number for the ancient world. Or, as it turns out, if you use the contingent theory, probably around 25 to 30,000 people, which is a lot more imaginable. So anyway, but it's Rashi who takes this fact that you can extrapolate on big numbers and says that he sees something in the nature of God, because Rashi points out that God counts the number of people at the beginning of Exodus, where he counts the number of Israelites coming down into Israel. There is a count of the priests that goes on in Leviticus, and then there's this count in Numbers. And Rashi says God loves Israel so much, he sits around and counts them all the time. He is like a shepherd who is constantly keeping track of each individual sheep in the flock. And so for Rashi, the value of this story is not about military might or military weakness or confidence. It's really a message about love. It's about the fact that God loves us so much that he is constantly attending to us. And I imagine Rashi understands this in the sense that all Israel counts. But later commentators extend this even further and say, well, what does that mean? It means everybody counts. You count. I count. We all, as individuals, as well as Israel as a whole, matter to God. And therefore, the value that we can take from this Torah portion is our individual worth and dignity, along with our collective worth and dignity in the eyes of God. So that's the message. And of course, that is in what's the word I'm looking for? That goes in congruence with the general Israelite and biblical idea that we simultaneously don't count because we're nothing in the face of the cosmos, and we are of ultimate value because God values us. That's the famous Hasidic story that says everybody should walk around with two notes, two 3M stickies in their pocket. One 3M sticky should say on it, I am but dust and ashes. You should stick that in one pocket. And then the other 3M sticky says, the whole universe was created for me. And then you stick this in this pocket. And so at those times when you're feeling really, really grandiose, when you think that you are the master of the universe and that your poop doesn't stink, you should pull out this little note and remind yourself, I am but dust and ashes. And if you're at a real low point where you're feeling just terrible about yourself, remember that the Torah teaches us that the whole world was created for me. All right. So you ultimately matter. And being able to balance that humility and that hubris together is the essence of the religious experience. To simultaneously understand one's insignificance, but also one's value. And so that, at the end of the day, is what our Torah portion is talking about, is about finding our place in the universe where we count. It's been a delight talking to you. I hope you have a wonderful Shavuot. I hope you have the opportunity to either tune in or come join us on Sunday night for our Tikkun Leil Shavuot. It will begin at 8 and we will be finished by midnight. I look forward to seeing you then. Chag Sameach.